Everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. It's the Wednesday edition of Status Coup News. I am your host, Kim Brown. I'm very excited, very happy to be here. I'm hosting here with you on Wednesdays. You can catch me here Wednesdays, 5 p.m. And you can catch me Tuesdays and Fridays. What day is it? Tuesdays and Fridays on my own channel, Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Please go over there and like and subscribe. My very deepest apologies there. So, anywho, welcome, 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 everybody. Do us a favor, come on in and give the video a thumbs up. Become a subscriber to Status Coup News. More importantly, please consider a membership to Status Coup News because we have to keep independent left voices, media voices on the air. Jordan does amazing work here, covers working people issues, gives it to the politicians the way they need it, giving it to them. And you don't get that many other places. You get that on my channel, you get that at Jordan's channel, you get it a couple other places. But yeah, become a member of Status Coup News and help keep these perspectives here online on YouTube. So we got a great show in store for you today. At the end of the show, towards the end, I like to front sell my show in reverse. So I'll tell you first what I will be talking about last, coming up at the end of the show. So the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul, in their San Francisco home, still making a lot of news. And what's also making some waves is the revelation that the U.S. Capitol Police indeed had cameras on the Pelosi residence. And it just so happened when the hammer wielding, unhinged person entered their house, somehow, some way, with fresh new funding of over $2 billion. The U.S. Capitol Police were not looking. They were not looking at the screen. They were not doing their job. Why in the hell do we continue to fund the police when they lack the ability to do very basic things and even lack the ability to keep the important people safe? Not that I give a fuck so much about the important people, but it's like, hey, Seuss, if that's how they're falling down on the job with the Pelosi's, now you should have no expectation of the police coming to your rescue in any significant way. That's at the end of the show. In the middle of the show, Joe Biden and the rest of the Democrats are out around the country stumping as we are just several days away from the midterm elections, from Election Day. Early voting is already underway. We're seeing Obama here and there. And per usual, a day late and a dollar short, the Democrats want to start to reach out, do their voter reach out, their minority voter reach out. So they're making the rounds on minority owned or Black outlets, right? And Joe Biden gave a very eye-opening interview with Rickey Smiley. Rickey Smiley is a radio personality. He has a syndicated morning show. And we're going to get into some of the shit that Rickey Smiley asked Joe Biden, because he asked him very specifically and straightforwardly, what have you done for Black people? And the list that Joe Biden gave, not impressive. It is very underwhelming. And the rub is a lot of the solutions and things that Joe Biden claims to have offered up to aid Black Americans is some shit that he caused in the first damn place. Some shit that was his fault. And he come around talking about, look at what I fixed, sir. You caused the problem to begin with. But before we get there, I wanted to take a moment and examine a lot of the rhetoric that is coming from cable news pundits. I'm going to say liberal, definitely not left, but liberal, Democrat-friendly pundits about the cost and the consequences of this election on the midterms, and how if we don't vote, we're going to descend into violence, right? The hyper-focusing on January 6th and now this latest incident with the attack on Paul Pelosi has really got the liberals fired up and ready to go. It's big 08 Obama energy. We know where that ended up taking us. So I want us to listen to this clip from MSNBC host Rachel Maddow. Full disclosure, I have not watched Rachel Maddow's show, and I'm guessing 10 years. I avoid cable news like the fucking plague. But I was checking trending topics and I saw Maddow was trending. I said, let me see what Rachel Rach over here talking about. and I saw what Rach was over here talking about, and I was not impressed with what Rach had to say. So I'm gonna let you guys hear it, and then we're gonna come back, and I'm gonna tell you what she has failed to say and also failed to acknowledge. Just take a listen.
If you minimize it, mock it, celebrate it, the attempted murder of the Speaker of the House's husband, what is now formally charged as the attempted kidnapping of the Speaker of the House. Well, if that's how you react to knowing this has happened, well, then you're telling us what you want instead of politics. You're telling everybody what you want to be able to do, what you want your side to be able to do to your political opponents, what you enjoy seeing your political opponents subjected to. And that is, in fact, the other option if we're not going to have elections anymore. It's either violence and force or it's voting. And if it is not voting, then it is going to be violence and force. We're 8 days out from the first national election since the last Republican president, the leader of their party, tried to stay in power by force. And, on Friday, a man pled guilty in federal court to threatening to kill Congressman Eric Swalwell and his staff. Also last week, 3 people were just found guilty of their part in a militia kidnapping plot targeting the governor of Michigan. Today, Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn testified in the seditious conspiracy trial of the pro-Trump paramilitary group, the Oath Keepers, for their role in Trump's effort to have a violent mob of his supporters overthrow the government and keep him in power by force. In power, by force, despite the election results. In power despite the election results and therefore by force. Those are the choices, right? It's either elections or it's force and violence. We are 8 days out. In this election, a clear majority of Republican candidates for congressional and statewide offices say election results should no longer count. They do not believe in election results. Even below that level, in state legislative races, look, clear majorities of Republican candidates in those races in the swing states, they say election results shouldn't count. They don't believe them. We shouldn't use elections anymore. If they do not want us to have elections anymore, don't kid yourself that there is another good option. It is democracy or it's not. And if it's not, it's violence and force.
Rachel Maddow there with some words of meh. And I'm going to tell you why what she had to say was meh. Because she says if it's not elections, then it's violence and force. And for the majority of the existence of the United States, these elections have come with both force and violence. The exclusion, the intentional exclusion of significant portions and populations of the American public for the majority of this country's existence has been the standard, it's been the norm, it's been the status quo. We have only had 3, 4, potentially 3 or 4 decades of not expected election day violence, right? So for only a very small window of the history of voting in this country has only been punctuated somewhat by nonviolence, by not actual force and violence. The violence has presented itself in other ways by Black people, non-white folks being denied the right to vote by surreptitious ways, removing them from the voting rolls, purging them from voter rolls, not acknowledging that they have the right to vote when they show up to vote, making sure that voting machines in Black and brown areas are not accessible or not working. Like the violence has always been there in these elections, Rachel. The difference is where everybody else who is non-white, potentially non-male, non-hetero has been experiencing the fascism through voter suppression and voter oppression. The reason why Rachel Maddow is pearl clutching at this particular moment is because the fascism is coming for the rest of y'all. Fascism, hold on. White people are like, no, wait a second. Now we can't be having force and violence in our elections. And Black people are like, we can't because we have experienced that. Okay. Our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents have experienced nothing but violence at the polls. And it's so ahistorical and dense for the liberal media to zero in on these most recent incidents of the kidnapping plot against Gretchen Whitmer and the plot against Eric Swalwell, and of course January 6th and the like. But political violence when it comes to voting in elections is what America does best. And I want us to take a couple of quick trips back in history just to remind everybody of that, because when these liberal pundits get on TV, they only think about the modern terms. And I think that journalists as a whole do the country and their viewers a tremendous disservice by not putting things in historical context. So I want us to look, if we could, class, a quick package, less than 2 minutes, so you won't fall asleep. But this is American history. This is not Black. This is American history, and you guys need to understand that. So we are going to see a clip giving us a quick primer on the Colfax massacre of 1873 in Louisiana. Oh, and what happened? It was around an election. And who was trying to vote? Black people. And who showed up? The police and the Klan. Political violence. Let's take a look.
The Colfax Massacre occurred on April 13, 1873, in a small town of Colfax, Louisiana. The resulting white and black clash stemmed from the defeat of the Democrats for the 1872 governor of Louisiana. On April 13th, 300 armed white men, including members of the white supremacist organization, the Knights of the White Camellia, and the Ku Klux Klan, attacked the courthouse building. When they maneuvered a cannon to fire at the courthouse, 60 black defenders fled while others surrendered. James Hadnot was accidentally shot by one of his own men. The white militia responded by shooting all the prisoners. The white mob went on to kill African Americans who had nothing to do with the events, and it continued through the night. After the dust settled, 150 African Americans were killed, including 48 after the battle. 3 whites were killed, and a few others injured. Even the total number of blacks are unconfirmed due to their bodies being dumped into the Red River and some secretly buried. 97 white militiamen were arrested and charged after New Orleans police and federal troops restored order. A handful of them were convicted, but were released in 1875 when Supreme Court ruled the Enforcement Act, also known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, was unconstitutional. No one was ever arrested by the state of Louisiana.
Colfax massacre in Louisiana, 1873. They couldn't even count the number of dead. But Paul Pelosi got busted in the head with a hammer, is getting top-notch medical care, and we should all be terrified. I also want to remind everybody about the Wilmington massacre in North Carolina of 1898, when a multiracial government was elected and white supremacists backed by law enforcement came into the town, terrorized the black residents and their white allies, and killed so many people. Again, they don't know what the final number was of black people that were murdered. Why were they murdered? Because they tried to take and assume some political power, right? They believed what the Constitution said, that they had a right to vote and to be 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. They believed it, right? And tried to execute it. And what happened? The white supremacist power structure smacked it down with violence, political violence. But some people might be like, hey, but you know what? That was so long ago. Come on, Kim. What are you even talking about? That's way back when. That doesn't even count. How come it don't count? Let's pop up the January 10th, 1966 piece from the Zen Education Project there, Colin. Because in 1966, let's see, my mom was probably about 20. I guess my dad was about 19. My grandparents were all very much alive and kicking. Maybe even some of my great-grandparents were still alive. Let's take a look at this, y'all. January 10th, 1966, voting rights activist Vernon Dahmer murdered. Okay. Now, have you heard of Vernon Dahmer? Chances are you haven't, because American schools ain't shit. But let me give y'all a quick synopsis here. On January 9th, 1966, Vernon Dahmer announced on the radio that he would pay the poll tax for anyone who could not afford to register to vote. Now, despite the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, a poll tax was still charged in local elections in Mississippi. And you know what happened the next day to Mr. Vernon Dahmer? The very next day, Dahmer's home was firebombed by the Ku Klux Klan. Dahmer guarded the front door while his wife and his children escaped out the back. He died the very next day from severe burns and smoke inhalation. A brief description of his extraordinary life. Anyway, you should look up Vernon Dahmer because he was quite remarkable. One of the few Black landowners. He had a business, and he was determined to try to empower Black folks in the South, particularly in Mississippi, because he was there outside of Hattiesburg to assume control over the rights allegedly bestowed to us in the Constitution. And what happened? The white political power structure came and killed him, murdered him. Okay, political violence, right? Black people trying to get some voting rights, they get murdered. Again, this ain't way back when. This is 1966. Let's go to the other one here. Sorry. This one is going to be about, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. I think it's the one about Jimmy Lee Jackson. Let me pull that up. Yes, Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was a civil rights activist and Baptist church deacon. He was shot by state troopers in Marion, Alabama on February. During peaceful voting rights march, his murder was a catalyst for the Selma to Montgomery march, very famously where Representative John Lewis got busted in the head by police there, and they attacked by troopers on Bloody Sunday. Yes, so Jimmy Lee Jackson was the catalyst for the march from Selma to Montgomery. And again, y'all, if I wanted to, if I really, really felt like it, we could do a whole long course. I'm sure my good friends, my comrades over there on Black Power Media have a longish piece that fully entails the levels of political violence that African Americans and non-white folks have endured, and even white people endured the shit. When new immigrants, new Jewish immigrants, new Italian immigrants, new Irish immigrants, they also experienced political violence, but the difference was they were able to grow into their whiteness in America, right? So once the Irish and Italians and the Jewish folks were able to step into white assimilation, they got to enjoy those benefits of white privilege and then build their own political power infrastructures amongst their communities. But those things could never be afforded to Black folks because Black. It's like, I can't erase my Blackness. I will always be very obviously Black along with everyone else Black. So the stratification of racism in this country is part of the reason why democracy has never been fully enjoyed by all. So when liberals like Rachel Maddow and those who support the president and these Black bourgeoisie adjacents, to the white power structure, I'm like, who the fuck are y'all even talking about? Like, democracy for whom? And I always implore people, like, if you're not believing what I'm saying, I need you to point to the date and year in which Black folks enjoyed all of the privileges of Americanness. And nobody can ever tell me the date. I find that very interesting. And I know y'all be like, okay, well, Kim, that's in the 60s again. That's way back when. Let's pull up that Brennan Center piece there, Colin. Thank you so much. The Brennan Center recently put out this report. And of course, they done put a big old pop-up over my goddamn page right now. But the Brennan Center did a report where they examined the amount of rejected mail-in ballots in Texas. And their findings were very stark. You guys, I know this might actually surprise you. But roughly about a third or more of mail-in ballots showed that mail-in ballots in Texas that were eventually rejected and or voting applications that were rejected were done via racial lines. So more often than not, Black voters in Texas, Asian voters in Texas, and Latino voters in Texas found that even though they were permitted to vote, they were allowed to vote, if they did mail-in voting, their votes were more rejected than that of white people. That is called voter disenfranchisement. Okay. That's almost as bad as turning people away. It's almost worse because you're giving people the delusion and the illusion that they are actively participating in the democracy when all they did was basically, they just checked a box on a piece of paper, and the election officials looked at that box. They say, "Oh, Miss Rivera, throw it in the trash. Lakeisha Jackson, Chi-Min Lee, throw that shit away. Away, them votes do not count." And that's worse. So that is actually a form of political violence. A voter disenfranchisement is also political violence. So again, I'm still scratching my head as to what exactly Rachel Maddow is pearl clutching about. But I know what it is, right? It is the distinct privilege of never having to know this history, of not understanding the ways in which American history continually repeats itself. And as somebody as educated as Ms. Maddow, she seems to have a very limited understanding of American history because she only keeps referencing these most recent events when the history of political violence is well documented in America, and it shouldn't come as a shock to any fucking body, right? But the problem is, or the issue rather, is that the pearl clutching comes because they understand that the fascism that non-white people, Black people, Indigenous folks, Latino folks have had to live under, with limited citizenship, limited rights as citizens, not even be able to fully participate in the democracy, and having the weight of state law enforcement always on your ass. That is a reality that most white Americans don't live, right? And the fear that they could soon be on the receiving end of what I like to call the nigger treatment terrifies them. And they should be terrified, right? Even white folks who believe themselves not to be racist, right? And there's a difference between I'm not racist and I'm anti-racist, okay? Because the people who say I'm not racist, oh, I don't see color, I love people, I love the Black, everybody, red, yellow, blue, green, aquamarine, it doesn't matter. I love all people. Okay. That is always a red flag to me when I hear white people talking that dumb shit. Because I'm like, I don't know any aquamarine people, baby girl. I don't know any green people. So what are you talking about? Exactly. But when those folks understand that their vote might now not be counted, right? That's the big mongering thing I'm hearing from Rachel Maddow, and she's not wrong per se. No, those Republicans who are of the Trump ilk, who are vying to be Secretary of State or governor in their respective places, yeah, they've already said they are not going to recognize the results of the election if those results do not go their way. And that is what's terrifying white liberals, that all of a sudden they could get the nigger treatment. All of a sudden your votes won't be counted. And they understand that, hey, I don't see color, right? Says the I don't see color people, but they damn sure understand enough about America and racism to understand that they don't want to be Black in America. And they damn sure do not want to receive the treatment that Blacks and non-whites receive in this country when it comes to alleged constitutional rights. And that is where Rachel Maddow loses me. that is usually where cable news loses me generally. But here's the thing. But I want you guys to understand the opportunities for Higgy Haga are very well and good. Colin, let's go to that Virginia pilot piece, please. I'm getting destroyed with pop-ups over here. It's pretty ridiculous how this goes on the interwebs. But sneakily, I don't know if this has actually made national news, but I've seen it here locally. I'm local to the DC area. The Virginia Department of Elections reports that thousands more unprocessed voter registration transactions. What you mean voter registration transactions? So the long and the short of it is, you guys remember the motor voter bill, right? Where when you go to your DMV to renew your license or renew your identification. You can register to vote. You can change your party affiliation. You can do a lot of things. That was, I think, one of the Clinton-esque sort of voter registration actions. Way to go. But the problem is, since the summertime, state election officials have not been processing these voter registration forms to the tune of, I believe, well over 100,000. I'm sorry, here we go. The state disclosed 107,000 unprocessed transactions, okay? Election day is next week. And these local election boards in Virginia are having a very difficult time getting these many thousands of unprocessed applications processed. Now, the state of Virginia says because of same-day voter registration, this should not be a problem. Should not be a problem. There was another instance in Northern Virginia. I believe this was in Fairfax County. Chat, if I have this wrong, feel free to correct me. But thousands of voters in Fairfax County were sent information directing them to the wrong polling place. Yes, they just recently caught this mistake. It's funny how these mistakes, these unprocessed voter applications, the misinformation about where to vote, it's just so interesting to me how close to election day these giant mistakes seem to be happening. And it's also very interesting that these specific kind of mistakes are happening in Virginia under the leadership of Governor Glenn Youngkin. I just think that should be noted. So y'all, just do me a favor. Don't be like Rachel Maddow. Like, do not be like Rachel Maddow. Don't be like, vote or die, everybody. Because if we don't vote, it's going to be fascism. It's going to be death and destruction. What the fuck you think it's been like for everybody else, Rachel? What you think it's been like for everybody else? And Rachel herself, coming from somewhat of a marginalized community, and I'm trying to be fair here because she is a white woman. Yes, she's a gay white woman, but when affirmative action kicks in, she is the exact kind of person that they're looking to check them boxes, right? They will claim diversity because Rachel is white and gay. so she's different from the rest of the white people here at work because she's white and gay. You understand? Like that, it's that sort of liberalism that kind of drives me crazy because even the fact that she's somewhat, I can't even call her marginalized. I loathe to call her marginalized because I know that gay people are marginalized in this country, but the ways that happens along race is very significant also, right? So white gay people are not marginalized nearly, and trans people are not marginalized nearly to the extent that non-white gay people are. So she's still privileged within her marginalized status. And she was giving me big white woman energy there. Like, if we don't hurry up and vote, we got to vote. And it's like, honey, my people have been trying to vote. And you know what they were met with? Burning crosses. You know what they were met with? Assassinations. You know what they were met with? Voter disenfranchisement. So exactly what kind of democracy is it that you would like for me, us, and my community to uphold for you? No, we got to tear this shit down and start the fuck over. That's the only solution. That's it. America cannot be reformed. Period, point blank. Sorry. I know that's a bit of a radical take, but I can't, and I refuse, and I won't. I'm not going to participate in this delusion that we have to defend democracy, because really they're only talking about defending democracy for them. Okay. They're not talking about defending democracy for people that do not look like them. And that is where Democrats and liberals fucking lose me. Hey, let's take a quick hair pause for the cause. Do me a favor. Come on in here. I'm not looking at the chat. I hope you guys aren't screaming at me at all caps, but guess what? I'll be all right. So give the video a like. Please give the channel a subscription and a membership. And we're about to enter into one of my favorite portions of the program, and that is dunking on Joe Biden. Because guess what? I don't like him. Jim Crow Joe's got a hell of a reputation generally, but he has really made flimsy attempts to position himself as an ally to the Black community, right? If you recall, leading up to the election of 2020, Jim Crow Joe said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. And he said that with a straight fucking face. and I don't know, and I can't even recall who he said that to. But when we're talking about Democratic politics in particular, right? Non-white voters are often the pawns, the last line of defense, or rather the first line of defense that is usually paid attention to the least and gets the least amount of targeted actions to try to get them out to vote up until the very final weeks before the election, right? Black voters are sort of like the Democrats' backstop. Like, if the black vote doesn't turn out, Democrats don't win elections. But Democrats are so bad in their strategy and their messaging, they always wait. They always wait to the last minute to start reaching out to black media, to start going to black churches, et cetera, et cetera. And it really pisses me off because it slaps of last minute, hastily put together foolishness. But they do this every fucking cycle and think that we don't fucking notice. But that's cool. Let me stop saying fuck so much. I'm sorry. I'm getting angry because I know what we're about to talk about. I know exactly what I'm about to play you. And I'm going to try to keep my blood pressure at a reasonable level. I should have had a joint here rolled up and ready to go, but I forgot. So in making the push to try to get out the black vote, Jim Crow Joe made an appearance on the Rickey Smiley Morning Show, which is a syndicated morning show that plays on black radio stations across the country. Yeah. So I want you guys to listen to Joe Biden, Joseph Robinette, get on the FCC airwaves and start beating his chest about all the things that he's done for black people. I'm sorry, that he's done for black people or to black people. Okay, he said for black people. I'm gonna get into what he has done to black people after we check out this clip. This is about 2 minutes and some change. And I know Joe Biden's voice rings out like fingernails on a chalkboard, but please indulge me if you could for a moment and listen to what Jim Crow say that he has done for the blacks.
It's always a great time when you come on the show. The last time we spoke during your campaign for president, and you committed to making good on promises that are top priorities especially for black folks, people in the black community, like student loan debt, nominating the first black woman to the United States Supreme Court, and marijuana reform. Now that we're nearly 2 years into your, presidency, what have you done to improve the lives of African Americans?
Well, I hope I've improved the lives of African Americans like I said I would do. For example, too many African Americans were denied everything from Pell Grants, student loans, housing, et cetera, because they were arrested for possession of marijuana. Too many. All whites as well. So anybody who was ever arrested just for the possession of marijuana, their record is expunged. They don't have to listen anymore, and it's going to free up a lot of opportunities. I've also made sure that we're going to provide for student debt relief. You have 70% of African Americans receive Pell Grants, and what I've done, I've forgiven loans of $10,000 for every eligible borrower, and an additional 10 if you had a Pell Grant. And those historic resources support. I've also put in $6 billion for HBCUs for a simple reason. The students at black universities are extremely qualified as anybody at any other university, but because they don't have great endowments, they don't have these significant laboratories that teach the technical things that they need to be taught. And so this allows these universities to build these facilities so that now you graduate and you have the same training as you went to Harvard or you went to any other state university. And in addition to that, I kept my commitment, and I'm really excited about the fact we have the first black Supreme Court justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and she is really something else. You're going to be really pleased with her. I've appointed more female black Americans to the courts, to the federal bench than I can believe every other president combined. And so, look, there's a lot. And by the way, we now have a national holiday because I made sure that we're going to deal with what we said we were going to deal with. But the things that I think make the biggest difference, Ricky, that people haven't noticed, is not obvious, is For example, on COVID vaccinations, I made sure that we went exactly where the black community is, so they weren't left behind. And so the number of percentage of African Americans receiving their COVID shots is as high, in some cases higher, than all other Americans, because I didn't want them being left behind. We went to their communities to make sure that the docs were available to give them what they needed. And so, with police, we restricted federally chokeholds and signed executive orders on no-knock warrants, but I still support funding the police. But we should be funding the police, particularly in black communities where we have more social workers. We have more people doing the kinds of things that are equip the law enforcement to deal with things other than by pure force. And we have to hold cops accountable. But we need police officers. I'm not a defund the cops guy, but I am fund them and give them assistance that they need. Retrain them as to how they, in fact, are trained. That's all. I provided the money to do that. So there's a lot going on, and I feel really, quite frankly, good that, and we're replacing every lead pipe in America, ensuring everyone across this whole country has good drinking water on the shores of South Carolina. Anyway. And, right. But so there's just a lot going on. I'm probably talking too much. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. You pretty much answering all of my questions, because everything that you're saying was a question that I was going to ask.
In the interest of fairness, I did not listen to the entire interview, so I'm not going to just assume that Rickey Smiley didn't push back on any of that bullshit. But part of me very much wants to assume that Rickey Smiley did not push back on any of that bullshit, because in order to get interviews like Joe Biden, you have to be able to accept the bullshit. You can't challenge the president on his bullshit, on his very obvious lies. And, people want access to the president. You see, that's why they would never let me interview Joe Biden, because I'd be like, nope, sir, let's run it down, because he just gave us a bunch of bullshit that Joe Biden says that he has done for black people. And let me preface this by saying some of the things that he has proposed, or that he claims that he has offered solution for, to problems affecting the black community are things that he himself helped enact against the black community. For him to talk about marijuana, let's start there, about this very paltry marijuana reform, which is not even actually reform, because the Biden administration has failed to reschedule marijuana. And some people will be like, well, give him a chance. Okay, well, we gave Obama a chance. Obama had 8 whole years to reschedule marijuana. And I believe that the president can do that through executive action. I disagree with Speaker Pelosi. And I know y'all be like, well, she's the speaker. She knows. I don't know what the fuck she knows. Okay. I really don't know what the fuck she knows. I disagree with Speaker Pelosi that this has to be a congressional action. I believe that because the DEA is under the purview of the president, marijuana can be rescheduled via executive action, but we can have that debate at another time. But again, for Joe Biden to tout the expungement of only so far 6,500 people who were federally charged with simple possession of marijuana is a fucking joke. And they'll say, oh, well, it's thousands more in DC. When we're talking about literally thousands as it pertains to marijuana arrests and convictions, and the amount of people walking around in this country with the marijuana possession on their record, we're talking about millions of people. So for only several thousand to be included in the marijuana reform, that's not fucking reform, okay? That's giving somebody who has a broken leg a goddamn Band-Aid. Does that help the broken leg? Does it really do anything? Absolutely not. So, and let's pull up that ACLU report really quick, just to sort of hammer the thing home a little harder here about the marijuana, because the ACLU, to their credit, they have done a couple of very unprecedented reports about the ways that marijuana and the war on marijuana specifically is handled in this country differently from white folks to black folks. And their 2012 report, I think it was called The War on Marijuana in Black and White. Yep, that was it. 2012. It was revealing, okay? Because roughly black people arrested for marijuana, despite using weed at the same rates as white folks, black people are arrested at least 3 times as much, and that depends on where you are. In the nation's capital, DC, right next door to me, formerly known as Chocolate City, formerly known as Chocolate City. Residents in the district, Black residents, were 7, 8 times more likely to get arrested for marijuana before some actual marijuana reform came to the city via a progressive city council at the time. But just a couple of key findings as takeaway from this most recent report. A tale of two countries, okay, when it comes to marijuana. So some of their findings include the war on marijuana continues to rage on. Marijuana arrests are still widespread across the U.S., despite several states having decriminalized and outright legalized. Extreme racial disparities in marijuana possession arrests, they persist throughout the country and have not improved since 2010. Marijuana arrests decreased after legalization or decriminalization, which is a good thing, but racial disparities in America persist even in states that legalized or decriminalized marijuana. And I will give you guys a District of Columbia. I submit Washington, D.C. as evidence of that. The city council and the city decriminalized marijuana, made marijuana available medicinally, and the recreational sale part is still in a bit of a gray area because anyway, long story short, despite the fact that weed is legalized in DC, you can still receive a ticket. You can still receive a citation for reasons if you have more than the prescribed amount or whatever, if you're not smoking in a non-federal area. Come to find out that the neighborhoods east of the river, wards 7 and 8, which are predominantly the few remaining Black places in Washington, D.C., you never guess where the majority of the weed citations are written. If you guessed in the Black areas, you would be right. It's funny how that works. It's funny how that works. So that's Biden talking what he's done for marijuana. Nothing, because he still has a lot of room to go. The next thing that he said, he talked about funding for HBCUs. And I had to do a little bit of research on that because that to me was very significant. HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, have been chronically underfunded from both at the federal level and at the state level, okay? To the point that some HBCUs are literally owed hundreds of thousands of dollars from lack of critical funding. And in the Build Back Better bill, the $1.5 trillion that Biden was able to get passed, initially, he had promised billions for HBCUs. That number actually came out to be about $885 million is what it's actually got. I'm not sure what 6 billion number he's referring to in the Rickey Smiley piece that we just heard. But regardless, it's a massive step down from what was originally promised and owed to historically Black colleges and universities. And maybe some of those HBCUs would have bigger endowments if Joe Biden didn't spend his senatorial career for 30 years passing laws and legislation that locked up Black folks who could have potentially went to college, but instead of going to college, they had small amounts of marijuana on them, and Joe Biden sent them to jail. Thanks, Joe. I made a list. What was the other thing that Joe Biden said that he did for Black people that he absolutely did not do for Black people at all? Yes. So the part about funding the police, I think, is extremely critical because according to the polls for this upcoming midterm election, right? I was watching Meet the Press and Chuck Todd did his data download. Anyway, so one of the things that he referenced was the enthusiasm gap amongst Black voters during this midterm election season. And I think that's pretty critical because what the Democrats are not going to put together, they are not going to be able to draw this very direct straight line. It's part of the reason, a couple reasons. There's actually a few, but I'm going to highlight 2 quick ones. One reason why Black people are not coming out for Joe Biden is because Joe Biden owes us fucking money. And not just us, he owes you fucking money too. Do you guys not remember when he was in Georgia 2020 campaigning on the stump for Warnock and Ossoff? He was promising $2,000 in stimulus money. And then he got elected and he said, did I say 2,000? I meant to say 1,400. And let me tell you something, y'all. I'm not a rich person. So if somebody owes me money, I'm not going to forget that they owe me money. Okay. Now, I'm not an economist, but I understand that 1,400 is less than 2,000. And that leaves a difference of $600. And I ain't forgot, me personally, and I'm sure lots of other people have not forgotten that Joe Biden still owes us $600 fucking dollars. $600. Okay. Run me my money. And if you think, I don't care how it polls, I assure you that is still on the minds of some voters. This motherfucker said he was going to give us $2,000. He only ran us $1,400. Joe Biden still owes me $600. Run me my money. Okay. There's that. And the other thing he talked about in the Rickey Smiley interview, he talked about funding the police. And I'm so glad that he mentioned that. I'm so glad that Joe Biden needs to remind us that he is not against funding the police. He does not support defunding the police. And I want him and the rest of the Democratic pundits and strategists to remember he said exactly fucking that when Black people, and especially young Black people, fail to show up at the polls for Democratic candidates. Because you guys, kind of circling back to what we're talking about at the top of the show with this, delusion of democracy, like you cannot fund a literal occupying force in the communities, in non-white communities, and expect people to be grateful for the shit. Because I have seen police be funded to the freaking hilt in departments across this country, right? And yet the so-called crime rate doesn't seem to go down. Isn't that funny how that works? And you heard Joe Biden even say in that interview, we funded the police, and then he sort of garbled it a bit in something unintelligible and talked about social workers. Oh, I didn't hear you say you funded social workers. I heard you say you funded the police, right? So you're not really doing anything to address some of the reasons that end up with negative police encounters, particularly in non-white communities and Black and brown communities, where even the example of people experiencing mental health crisis, police are 3 times more likely to murder Black folks who are experiencing a mental health crisis. This is why on my show, and I'll do this here, I implore you, please, specifically a non-white person, but definitely a Black person, if you ever see a Black person having a mental health crisis, do not call the police on them, because chances are you will be summoning their executioner. Do you understand what I'm saying? The police do not show up to help. They show up to stop the situation, and they will do that force. They will do that by any means necessary. And they are not sympathetic to Black people who are acting out. Okay. So please, as a public safety and service announcement, don't ever call the police on a Black person who is definitely having a mental health crisis, because chances are at the hands of the cops. So Joe Biden admits that he doesn't fund mental health services, but he funds the police. And as we find ourselves in ridiculously difficult and challenging economic times, I find it very strange that Joe Biden would thump his chest about what he's done for Black people when literally he's done little to nothing. He's offered basically crumbs. And most notably, the federal minimum wage has not gone up. I haven't even heard. Are they even talking about that in Congress? Like, has that come up? Has that come up for a vote? Has it even been presented? Is there any sort of plan to move forward to elevate the wages of the lowest earning Americans? No. Oh, they just got to be in poverty? Oh, okay, got it. Thanks, Joe. You're doing great. Doing great. So let me just reiterate, okay? What Joe Biden has done for Black people pales in comparison to what Joe Biden has done to Black people. All of these policies, marijuana, policing, HBCU funding, COVID, he even talked about COVID. Who died the most during COVID? Not an accident. Who has the least access to healthcare across the country? Black folks and brown folks and non-Native folks, right? Or not non-Native, non-white, sorry. My bad, Native people. You know what I mean. I just find it laughable and interesting that Black bourgeoisie media types those who appear on cable news, those who are allowed, who are given the privilege of interviewing the president, will never check him on his shit. They will never call him to account for his record. And they won't actually call out the fact that these little trite baby steps are doing nothing to vastly improve the material condition of most people that find themselves in marginalized communities. And that's why we call him Jim Crow Joe. I always do this on my show, so I have to take a pause. I have to take a pause in between the things I'm talking about so I can sort of regroup and just remind everybody to please give the video a like, a thumbs up, become a member, subscribe to Status Coup, and you can go over and subscribe to my channel as well, Burn It Down with Kim Brown. I talk a little harsh, but I'm fair. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't hate anybody. It might sound that way, but for example, I could never hate men. I hate patriarchy. I could never hate white people. I hate white supremacy. Right? So let's just be clear about what is what. And I know sometimes I say the thing a little harsh, but hey, I'm a woman. If I say it nice, motherfuckers won't hear me. You understand? I have to say it. I have to say it sharply so I'm heard. And lastly, the last thing, actually, what time is it? Oh, yeah, we can do lastly. Okay, lastly. Defund the police. Interesting concept, yes? It's not even a concept. It's a policy demand. It's a very concrete, clear policy demand. The many billions of dollars that are spent on police should be reallocated to services in the community that better help to improve people's material condition, right? If it's universal basic income, if it's making sure that everybody has access to healthcare and mental health care, if it means that everybody has access to sufficient and adequate housing, they are drinking clean water again. Oh my God. Fucking Biden. For him to have the audacity to say that I'm replacing every lead pipe. Meanwhile, Flint, Michigan, still struggling. Meanwhile, the water crisis happening in Jackson, Mississippi. I mean, again, disconnected, and nobody's there to hold him accountable. It drives me fucking crazy. Sorry, I just had to come back to that. Where am I going here? So I am going to the place because we're talking about the police being funded. But before we talk about the police being funded, let's talk about what the police did with that funding. If we could get to Colin. Ooh, let's go to the piece from NBC News. Check out this headline. Let's circle back to the Pelosi attack if we could for a second, because, you know, you would think that Speaker Pelosi and her family would be amongst some of the most well-guarded in the country. After all I keep hearing is about how the many thousands of credible threats that Congress members have received. I would think, you know, the police will be on this, okay? But check this out, yeah. Capitol Police had a camera feed of the Pelosi home during the attack, but no one was monitoring it. And you know, when you do clownery, the clown comes back to bite, said a very famous Baltimore philosopher. Can't recall her name. It was Monique. Okay, it was Monique. When you do clownery, the clown comes back to bite. Now, if you recall, let's pop up the other article there, Colin. If you recall, because I said, what the fuck is this? This was November 18th last year. Biden signs bipartisan bills providing an additional resources for police. Would you like to know how much those additional resources were? They were about $2 billion. A lot of that reallocated to the U.S. Capitol Police after, in the wake of January 6th, when the police got their ass beat. I'm sorry. After January 6th, y'all, because to me, it was my enemies going against each other, the police and the white supremacists, because sometimes they are one and the same, right? But on January 6th, oh, I love watching clips of January 6th. It's some of my favorite. But anyway, so after January 6th, Congress acted lickety split. See, this is the shit that they can always agree on, funding the police. This is some shit that they will hop on in a bipartisan way very quick. If it comes to giving law enforcement and the military more money, oh, honey, we could reach across the aisle. We could dap up. We could do the secret handshake. We could do all kinds of shit in a fast and expedient way. That is what they did in November 2021, funded the U.S. Capitol Police in a package including about $2 billion. So going back to the NBC piece there, Colin, I find it laughable that $2 billion worth of policing could not keep Nancy Pelosi's husband safe. And why? Because the police are bad at their job. Okay, they're even bad at protecting the elites. Like, that's their main job, right? To protect the elites and to protect property. And they couldn't even do that. They let Paul Pelosi get his ass whooped by some random ass stranger. But here's the kicker though. Here's the rub. I assure you, if David Dupap had been non-white, the police's white supremacist spidey sense would have been activated, and they would have been like, Johnson, just go look at that monitor real quick. I feel like there's a Negro roaming around. We have to let's make sure that Mr. Pelosi is safe. But no, because he was an unassuming white man, he was able to slide right on under that camera feed, and the U.S. Capitol Police were none the wiser. Meanwhile, Paul Pelosi getting his head bashed in after his wife done sent $2 billion more to the U.S. Capitol Police. And again, when you do clownery, when you do the clownery, the clown comes back to bite. And let me say this, just for clarification's purposes, okay? I do not agree with Paul Pelosi getting bust upside the head with a hammer. But when I contextualize the political violence that he experienced versus the political violence that indigenous people, Black folks, and Latino folks have experienced on this continent since day one, I cannot cry. I honestly, only because I'm human do I feel a twinge of empathy for him, just because he's really an old man. But there's a lot of wicked, evil old men, and maybe some of them need to be hit upside the head with a hammer. I'm not saying that's the case here with Mr. Pelosi. I'm just saying I can't cry or even really be upset about elites experiencing political violence that my people have been experiencing here for a very long time, for decades, for generations, okay? So when you hear the Democrats and the liberals bemoan about we're losing our democracy, ask who's the we and who is the our. Who is we and who is the our? Who is included in this group that's quote unquote losing democracy, and whose WHOSE, the possessive, whose democracy are we referring to? Because fascism is what everybody else gets, okay? If you are in a marginalized group, you get the fascism, you get the over policing, you get the schools, you get denied either the right to vote, to have your vote counted, or when you do show up to vote, there are a number of hurdles, hoops, underfunded voting sites, polling places where voting machines don't work, where people have to stand in line for literally hours in order to exercise their right to vote. That's not a democracy, everybody. That's not a democracy. That's still engaging very heavily in subjugation, marginalization, and second-class citizenship. So challenge these liberals, okay? If you are an anti-racist, and I mean anti-racist, not one of those I don't see color don'ts, okay? Because you can keep that shit. You can keep all that I don't see color shit. I need you to be against racism. I'm not racist is not going to cut it in 2022. Not if you actually mean that you want things to be equal for everybody, and they are not equal for everybody. And the panic cannot come just because some people assume that now they are about to be further subjugated and have their rights denied of them. You should have been this upset when it was happening to the other marginalized folks all along. So anyway, guys, that's my time. Is there a member call tonight, Colin? Did I see that right?
No, that happened last night. Though, if you are a member, the recorded version of the entire call is up. You can see it wherever you are a member on. Just go to the member section.
Thanks, Colin. I can't keep the calendar straight. I don't know what day it is. I barely know it's November. So anyway, guys, do me a favor. Head on over to Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Give my channel a follow, subscribe, or whatever. Come check me out tomorrow. Also, Black Power Media on YouTube. We do the Remix Morning Show Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday mornings, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. It's usually a very good time. You could come over there and learn a thing or two. Maybe get some laughs in because we try to keep it way lighter than what I do here. So anyway, on behalf of Jordan and Colin, thank you all so much, Status Coers. I will see you next Wednesday. See you later. Bye-bye.